you very much, Sandra. I have a microphone on because I want to make sure that I'm heard by everyone here, but if I go into my soft talking mode, just raise your hand and I'll try to be louder. It's a real pleasure to be here today. As Sandra said, I got to take advantage of the library resources, and it turned into a passion of mine, finding my family genealogy. And I want to share that passion with you and encourage everyone here to take advantage of the resources that are available at the library and in our environment here that are mostly free. And so I'm going to take you on a little journey today along what I think are recommended route to go if you are starting on a genealogical journey or picking one up that's been sitting in your closet for a while. And hopefully some of the things that I can provide you will help carry you on your journey. If one person leaves here today with the drive to start the project or pick it off the closet shelf and get it going, then I feel like I will have done my job. So I'll just tell you a little bit about me because this whole premise is about where we came from. I grew up in Ohio, outside of Cleveland in a suburb, and all of my relatives were, that I knew when I was, while they were alive, were all from Ohio. So they had come to Ohio long before I was around, about 3 generations back before my Irish relatives came to America. And then actually over the course of this, writing of this book that I did and doing the genealogy search, I found that my one grandmother had German roots, and they had actually come to the United States in the 1700s. I right now live in Needham with my 3 boys and my husband, as Sandra said. We've lived here for almost 20 years, so I feel like we're a very big part of this community, and I'm really happy to be here today. So let's get started. So you're probably here for many different reasons today, but I find that some of the main motivations for people starting this journey are that you're either going to you're doing this because you want to honor an influential person in your life, or you want to start that family tree that you've been talking about for a long time, or somebody started it for you and passed it to you, and now you need to fill in the pieces, or you might just want to really preserve a story of somebody in your family that was really important to you. And all 4 of those motivations were important to me as I was going through this. But primarily the 4th one, where I had a grandmother who was a very big part of my life. She was in my general neighborhood while I was growing up as a child. She actually lived with us for a number of years after her first husband died. And all through my adult years, she was a confidant of mine, and we were very close. And she had a story of her birth and childhood and getting to be where she was that was just really important in our family. And as my kids grew and our families expanded and nieces and nephews came, I realized I really want to preserve this story for everyone, for them, for their children, for children after them. It was just that important to me. So what I did was, and I should have said this at the beginning, what my end product is a book that I self-published. And what I did is I started from very small beginnings. I have 3 sisters, and my youngest sister was in college and had a project to ask one of her elders to interview one of her elders about her childhood. And so my sister decided to ask my grandmother, who was living in Connecticut at the time. And my grandmother was in her 80s, and she, up until that point, I can honestly tell you, she had never once in my life said anything to any of us about her past, ever. So, but she embraced the project, and she took the time and sat down with her then husband, and they kind of reminisced about their childhoods together. And she wrote these 12 pages, and that's all I started with. So for anyone who's starting out with a very little bit of information and trying to get into try to figure out the larger picture, think of these 12 pages, because I went from 12 pages to a 50,000 word book over the course of 6 years. So that was my goal, was to just actually get her story down. The publishing part of it kind of came later, as I realized I have something here that might be really worthwhile putting into a book format. And that came a little bit later, but I was determined to get her story on paper to the best of my abilities. And then lastly, I just wanted to point out, the importance of the family narrative. There's a great article that you can look up online. It was from March of 2013, and it's called "The Stories That Bind Us." And it was an article in the New York Times. And it was basically about how the family narrative itself can be very powerful to an individual, to understand that they're from something bigger. And in the article, it's very well written. It talked about people in general, but it also talked about children specifically. If children, and there were some studies done, that if the child understood their background and where they came from, and that it isn't just them against the world kind of thing, that they were much more resilient and that they had more self-confidence. And this doesn't mean you have to have a story with a famous person in it, or you have to have lineage back to the Mayflower or anything like that. It's just to understand that you're bigger than one person, that your existence came from somewhere. And there's the ascending narrative where people will say, you know, we came here with nothing, I had $5 in my pocket, and we worked hard and we got to where we are. There's the descending narrative where we had it all, we lost it in the crash, and we never got back to where we were. And then there's the third one that's just a hybrid. It's like we've been through the ups and the downs, and we somehow always get through. We enjoy the highs, we work through the lows, and that's our story. So whatever the story is, if you can somehow put some boundaries around it and define it, it's very important for the family. It's very important for identity and for self-confidence. So where do you start? There's a lot of resources, and part of the reason why I want to come here is to share good places to go for those resources. And obviously the first, very primary, most important, above all resource is anyone who is alive today who can help tell the story. So you need to get out there and you need to interview people. You need to talk to the people that are in your family, close, extended, anywhere. Send out notices, let everyone know that you're starting this project, and send them a questionnaire if you want. Here's the things that I would love for you to tell me about your childhood, about your upbringing, about Aunt Mary, about whatever, you know, anything you can do to kind of get the person to focus in on what you're looking for. And I think you'll be surprised, if you haven't already tried this, how responsive people are to that inquiry, because so many people in the back of their mind want to do it themselves also, but if they hear that someone in their family is doing it, they'll say, great, this is fantastic, I'll give you all that I possibly can. Your second source is definitely journals, if you come from a family who like to keep journals, photos, and Bible records. Just cast a wide net. Tell everyone that you're doing this and say, do you have any photos? Do you have any of this information? I was able to uncover some college yearbooks and some high school yearbooks of my grandmother. But the photographs themselves, and photos are so easy to share now. My mom's cousin, who I wasn't always in direct contact with, she ended up sending me, since she and my mother shared the same grandmother, she sent me photos of their grandmother from her teenage years that my mother and her sister had never ever seen before. So you never know what's out there, honestly, even though you might see people a lot or talk to them, or you have to ask because they're out there. And Bible records I wanted to throw in there just because I find those fascinating. My family, my grandmother was raised in a family with a Methodist minister who traveled around. So obviously the Bible was an important part of their life, but a lot of families growing up in rural America in the late 1700s, 1800s, early 1900s, the Bible was the most important book in the house, or it may have been the only book in the house. And so that's where else would you record all the family important things in your family? So actually on the inside of many Bibles, people record the births and deaths and marriages in their family. This is exactly what happened in my family. I have a copy of the inside of the Bible where my great-grandmother wrote all of the important family events. And historical societies collect these Bibles if they're donated to them, but I mean, families hand them down through generations, and oftentimes you can have a Bible with just decades and decades of information in there that's the actual spelling of people's names, the correct birth dates, the correct death dates. It can be very important, so be sure to look for those. And I want to make sure the digital and non-digital piece of the puzzle also gets looked at. We're in a fascinating age where there's so many digital resources, and we should definitely take advantage of those, but do not forget about the non-digital ones as well. Not every archive type piece of information has had a chance to get to the digital point, or ever will. And just to give you a couple of examples, and sometimes lose track of who's who, but my great-grandfather on my mother's side was a firefighter for the Cleveland firefighter force. And he died after battling a blaze in the winter where he caught pneumonia and basically just froze, caught pneumonia, and died a few days later. And I wanted to try to find out more about him, see if they have records, and there's actually a Case Western Reserve Society in Cleveland has a museum and an education center for firefighting. And I spoke to them a lot, and they helped me actually dig up records, and we were able to find the actual only picture of my great-great-grandfather that anyone in my family had ever seen, because he had his picture taken for the firefighter battalion. And then I took it one step further. I really wanted to try to find out what fire he was in. So I wanted to look at the newspapers. And of course, this was 1909. And what I was able to do was I contacted the Cleveland Public Library to see what records they kept. And they had all of those newspaper records on microfilm. But I could get them for free through an interlibrary loan. And they sent them to Wellesley, that had the only reader of that particular kind of microfilm in the area. And I got to look through the papers from 1909 in Cleveland of whatever was going on in Cleveland at that time. And it was terrific. It was fascinating. I didn't find which fire my great-grandfather might have died in. There were a lot of fires that year. A lot of things going up in flames in Cleveland. But it was just it was very interesting to be able to use that information to kind of paint the picture of what was going on in Cleveland in that time, and just paint the picture for my family of what was going on in time. I was also I did make a trip to Cleveland because I go there to still see family pretty regularly, and on one of my trips I went to that museum and sat with the archivist and looked in one of the journals that he had pulled for me, because people who work in the archives are so excited to help people find what they're looking for. He found the journal that had the date of my great-grandfather's death, when the flag was lowered to half-mast, and it was written into the journal. And just to see that kind of information, it just makes the connection. It makes you realize that person was real, not just a name and on a family tree. There was a real person involved, and those are the kinds of discoveries that really got me involved in this, and really, got it to become a passion of mine. And I hope that you all get to share that, because it's very fun. And then, of course, we have to give due to the world's largest free research tool, which is, I'm just calling Google, but it's whatever you want to use. Google, Yahoo, Bing, whatever you like to use. It connects you to all the historical societies all over the country, all over the globe, if they have them. There's chat rooms where you can find people who are looking for the same thing you're looking for. There's maps that you can find through those historical societies, or just through mapping in general. I have relatives that were in North Carolina. I never made a trip down to North Carolina, but my mom and my sister went down there at one point, and I was able to give them, with pinpoint accuracy, exactly where the graveyard was, where our ancestors were buried. They found the graveyard, they called me from the graveyard, and it was in a location that was their property when they were tobacco farmers way back when. So they were standing on our family land, and it was just fascinating. And we couldn't have done that without Google. We would have been driving around unfolding the maps and trying to figure out where we were, but it was really special. And another thing to really keep an eye out for are these things called memory projects. And I think that they are generally more within large metropolitan areas, but it's sort of an overriding description for when groups of institutions or places that keep archival information get together and try to create something in kind of an artistic way, but make it very easy for people to access the information. Cleveland has a terrific one that brings, so the colleges all around Cleveland that may have their own archives all bring it all together. There's books about Cleveland, there's many photographic journals of Cleveland, and I know there's things like this all over the country. What it does, what it helps you do, it won't help you find a person in your family unless that person is famous, but it helps really draw the picture with color of what that particular time was like for someone. Like, for instance, when my grandmother, her family moved around 8 times through rural Ohio through her father's work as a minister, and then she got a job in Cleveland in 1932 when she was 24 years old, never having been in a city bigger than with 20 people in it as the center until then. So to be able to try to figure out what was Cleveland like in 1932 when my grandma was arriving there, to work for the Federal Reserve Bank, which was brand new, in the middle of the Depression in Cleveland, that was one of the hardest hit cities of the Depression. I sat and looked through the records in that memory project for days and hours. It was fascinating, and it really helped me understand and be able to write down what her experience may have been and extrapolate into it. And the US Gen Web is the little comment down at the bottom too. It's another similar memory project too, and I found it a few times in my searches, and it's more of a county-related thing. Like if it's more of a rural area, counties might get together in this US Web Gen project, and it's kind of a common term across the country. So that's another thing to look out for. If you're looking for something in a particular county or rural area, look for US Gen Web. So the places where I went, I feel a little bit like Dr. Seuss. The places where I went on my journey, I tried to kind of go back and remember all of the places that I visited virtually. And this is not a complete list, but it's a pretty complete list. So I was in Tennessee, I was in Kentucky, I was in Ohio, I was in North Carolina, I was in Kansas, I was in Illinois. I went all these places online to find information, and I found something in every single place listed here. And I'm just trying to bring that point home that these resources are out there and they're boundless. The 2 places on here that I did visit are the Fire Museum that I mentioned before, and then the U.S. National Archives, which I'll get into in a little bit. So first, we're going to take a look at one of the biggest resource tools that are available to all of us is Ancestry.com. And just with a show of hands, has anyone been on Ancestry.com before? Terrific. It is. It's a terrific tool. It's a subscription database that anyone can subscribe to, and it gives you access to many different databases, primarily the U.S. population census, but also Social Security indexes, military databases, and whatnot. I have another slide coming that gives a little bit of a synopsis on it, but there's basically 3 ways to get at Ancestry.com. And the first one is to subscribe on your own. You can get a monthly subscription or a 6-month subscription. They start at $20 a month, $100 for 6 months for US, and then you can get a world subscription for $35 a month, $150 for 6 months, and then World Plus, which I don't know what's beyond the world, but I imagine that it means more resources dedicated to try to find ancestors beyond the United States to help with looking at such a long distance away. You can also, Ancestry.com, when the 1940 census came out, which was in 2012, they offer, and they still offer, the 1940 census for free. So you can actually get a membership with Ancestry.com, a free membership, to just look at that particular year of the census, which is a great gift. It's a great place to start. And then lastly, you can come to the library and use Ancestry.com here. And Sandra explained to me that originally, I don't know how many years ago, but it was the Friends that purchased the subscription database to Ancestry.com for the library. And then the library, after its use, assessed whether it was worth continuing, and they continue to renew it every year. And it's free if you use it here at the library. All you need is your library card. And you get all of the features of Ancestry.com, except in the library subscriptions, the way that I kind of draw the line is anything that you would get in your personal subscription that has to do with collaborating with other members, you cannot do that with the library. So, for instance, if you wanted to share your family tree with others and see how their family tree looked in comparison to you, you can't do that because you're not like an individual member. Or there's other collaboration tools that they offer as an individual member. But it has a wide variety of resources that are free that are really worth investigating. And I'm going to just take you through a little sample inquiry into Ancestry.com, but it's very short. So for those of you who are familiar with Ancestry.com, it'll be quick going through it, but just to give everyone an idea of kind of what you can be ready for as you hit Ancestry.com. But first, let me just mention, these are the databases that you can have access to: census, birth, marriage, public member trees, military, immigration, and travel. And then they have a lot of other options. You can access the Ancestry.com for the UK or things like that that would require additional membership. But there are message boards that you can trade information on. But I really want to point out these charts and forms, and this is up for anyone, whether you're the library subscription or your personal subscription. They have these blank forms for people who really enjoy the pen and paper part of this, if you're not, and that's many of us. You're gathering a lot of information, you need to try to stay organized. You're doing this over a course of a number of months or years or whatever. How do you remember who you spoke to, what you collected from whom? And all these different forms are available that can help you just get organized in your search, and I highly recommend going there, finding those first. The ancestral chart is basically just a very simple family tree, and that's usually a good starting point for everybody. And they also offer Ancestry DNA if anyone wants to send their saliva sample. And I think that that's connected with some of the TV shows that have been doing the ancestry searches. You have to go to that level of detail. So I didn't do that. But very basic things that you can do with Ancestry.com is you can create a family tree, and they have great little programs to try to help you get that started, because it can be a little bit overwhelming. But you can also go in and hire an expert if you get to the point where you've taken this as far as you care to or want to or can go. You can hire an expert. And they also do have some nice, really pretty options for publishing. So once you've finished what you want to do from a research standpoint and you want to share this with your family, look at some of the Ancestry.com options for publishing. Some nice books and just what to do with your family tree in terms of making it frameable or something like that. I pretty much camped out at the census information when I was in Ancestry.com. I didn't utilize a lot of the other features. It was purely for census for me. And the census has been going on every 10 years since 1790. It's a great snapshot of where the country was every 10 years, and so it's a great snapshot of where your ancestors were every 10 years. Except for the 1890 census is mostly destroyed because of a fire. And of course that's the critical decade that I needed, but you can kind of try to piece other things together. So the 1940 is the most recent because there's a 72-year privacy clause in the census gathering that makes them wait 72 years before they send it out. It's the most detailed ever, and all of the census information has got progressively more detailed as the years go by. And some things have dropped off, many things have been added, but in 1940, the census information was very detailed, and I put pages on people's seat in the audience if you can't see the next form, because it's you don't really need to see the form that I'm about to show you to understand what I'm talking about, but just to give you an idea that it is very detailed. But you can get information like names of everybody in the household, names of everybody on the street in their household. You can get income levels, you get ages, birthplaces, where parents were born, and you can that whole where were your parents born kind of thing can help you really get to the next question that you need to ask. This is the form that I'm talking about, and this is actually only part of the form. It is very detailed, but I always found it really interesting, and so now I'm really going to take you through the example that I mentioned, where you can see the results of the survey. And to me, I'm definitely a research geek, but looking at the actual original census form that was filled out by somebody standing on the doorstep of my ancestor's house was really thrilling to me, even though it's not them writing it down, just knowing that they we're answering the questions and that somebody talked to them. It's just another whole example of just kind of bringing this back alive for you. So to just very quickly go over kind of what you need to think about when you're going through Ancestry.com. You need very little information. I think the only required fields on this form, which is what you get when you say, I want to look for somebody in the 1940 census. This is what pops up. The only required information on here is the first and last name. The rest of it is all optional. So depending on how many criteria you give will help your search in its quality and what they kick back to you as results. This is my grandmother, Esther Saunders, in 1940. Saunders was her last name. And I knew that she was born in 1908, and I knew she was born in Ohio. I couldn't at that moment remember the name, that kind of thing. You don't have to know all the details. If you know the state instead of the town, that's fine. I knew she lived in Cuyahoga County, Cleveland, so that was helpful. So that's basically all I put in. I didn't include any other events, any family names, any keywords. And this is the most basic search term, and I could just click search. But I could also add to this more information. And the more information that you add, so this is asking, oh, do you know who the head of the house was at that time? Do you know what her marital status was? Do you know street names, things like that, as you get very detailed. You can input this information or you can completely ignore it. And I found through searching that sometimes it was helpful to put all the information I knew about somebody to really narrow the search, and other times it totally was not the right way to go, because then it was too narrow that it missed what I was looking for. Because there's human error in the census too, and there's human error in transferring the census to digital. So for instance, one of the times I was looking for Margaret Saunders, and Margaret was spelled, M-A-R-G-A-R-E-T-T-E or something like that, and I was looking for M-A-R-G-E-T. Another time I was looking for David Miller, which is a very common name. That was my grandmother's father's name. And I could not find a David Miller in Ohio for the life of me, and I was looking all over. And then I realized I should just look on D. Miller. That year, he had just given his name as D. And so it would not show up anywhere else because I was looking for David. And they do, when they bring back search results in Ancestry.com, they do give you a long list. And what they try to do, the program, tries to do is put the closest match at the top, so as you page down through your list of results, you get farther and farther away from where you probably need to be. But you never know. It could be the name was wrong, the name was misspelled, or somebody transposed it wrong. In this particular census, my grandfather did the answering. I can show you how I knew that. And he didn't give the ages correct. So when I said my grandmother's birthday year was 1908, it came back with no Esther Saunders, born in 1908. But there was an Esther Saunders born around 1910. So it tries to help us. It tries to help us help ourselves. This is the form that I get back after I get a whole list of searches to respond to, and I click on the one that I think is closest. And it gives me kind of the synopsis of what was in the long form from the census. And you can choose at this point, in the upper right is a little picture, little thumbnail of the actual form. And so I'm going to show you the form, and I know that they're hard to see, but it's kind of fun to look at. So you don't have to go to the form. You can get a lot of information from this. But if you choose to look at the form, I tried to zoom in to give you some details. But this greened out area is my family in 1940, which was my great-grandmother was the head of the household. My grandpa and grandmother married with my mom. So if you're born before March of 1940, you can find yourself in the census now. My mom and her brother, and not the third child in the family are on here. And I can find that they're head of the house, son, daughter-in-law, grandchildren, when they were, how old they were, how much schooling they had, where they were born. Where they were in 1935 was also a question on the 1940 census. And if I keep paging over, I can actually find out that my grandfather was a copy reader for the newspaper. My great-grandmother was a supervisor at the telephone company. And she made $2,160 that year. So you can get some really interesting details out of this very great snapshot of what their life was like. And what I also find interesting is that you can also page down, here's their neighborhood. You know, they lived near somebody who was an oil refinery loader, they had a drugstore proprietor and the cashier lived together, father-daughter, bookkeeper at a commercial bank. You can just kind of get a picture of what the neighborhood was like just by looking at the census information. It's very fun for research nerds like myself. So that's it for the Ancestry.com. And I just wanted to spend a couple of minutes talking about the National Archives, which is also a terrific resource for everybody. I have family in Washington, D.C., and when I was looking up one of my family members, my great-grandfather, my great-great-grandfather, lived in North Carolina, and in the Civil War, he was a drummer boy on the Confederate side. And I really wanted to find out, I wanted to verify that. And so my aunt said, come on down to D.C. and we'll go, I have a friend who works in the archives and she can get us in there and we'll go look around. And I'm like, I can't go to D.C., I can't do it. I go on their website and lo and behold, I find that there's a regional office for the New England region in Waltham, 20 minutes away. It's fantastic. And if you haven't been there and you're researching people who lived in New England, that's a must-go kind of place. There's 13 of these offices all around the country. The one in Waltham is responsible for the New England states. The closest one to us is New York City, and then Washington, D.C., and then Chicago. So for me, trying to look for Midwest relatives, Chicago was the closest one. So I did a lot of research on their website to try to find if I could get records of family members coming in through upstate New York, which is what some of my ancestors did. But at these regional offices, they keep the microfilm and original records of a lot of the archive information, which is really helpful. If you're investigating something like transfer of land, or if there were any kind of civil activities like lawsuits or anything like that were going on, that you can get those records pulled by somebody at this location. They also have a research room that has public access computers, and you sign up and you can use them for an hour at a time. If there's nobody waiting behind you, you can use them for an unlimited amount of time. And there's volunteers and staff there helping people guide them through their search or find records if they need them. They offer free workshops, they have online exhibits, and they have a great website with links to other regional resources that you might not think of off the bat. And they're also available for hire if you want to take it to the next level and get their help. They are just located, if you go 128 north to Trapello Road, go east, it's like 2.5 miles up on your right, and it's this nice big building with big parking lot. I took my dad there, and he was in a wheelchair, and the access was terrific, very easy, very, very terrific. That was a day for the memory books for he and I. I find it very hard to summarize what is available in the archives for you in one slide, but this is my attempt to do that. So if you're looking for naturalization records of people immigrating in and out, in passenger arrival lists, border crossings from Canada, customs records, post-Civil War tax records, military service. There's supposedly a big database of, big resource of information related to African Americans, Native Americans, and Chinese. And just a lot of regional historical documents. They have a lot of photographs, a lot of architectural drawings. So if you're investigating ancestors from the New England region, this is a terrific resource. They also, in the research room, you can access Ancestry.com and Heritage Quest and Goldfreak.com, which are similar to Ancestry.com. So they have the same kind of subscription there as we would at the library. But they don't keep any vital records on site. So if you wanted to see somebody's death certificate or marriage certificate, they don't have them. That would be found in like the county archives of wherever that person was born. So now you have all these places to go. So, and websites to visit. So what do you bring with you? Where do you start? Basically, you really just need to bring whatever facts you've collected about your family, just even if it's just names and the year they were born. That's just the basic facts that you need. If you have more information, great, bring it. But start with a notebook or however you like to compile your information. Use the forms from Ancestry.com. I found it really helpful as I was going along I finally got in the groove of bringing a flash drive along with me, a little USB drive, because especially looking at the census records, the best way that I found looking at them, you can do a zoom in and zoom out as you're looking on the computers, but the best way I found was to be able to print screen it, save it onto my flash drive, and bring it home with me, and then do all that kind of zooming in, zooming out to try to really investigate that very detailed document in my house instead of trying to do it at the library. And especially if you're going on a trip to your homeland or something like that, make sure you take that flash drive with you. Make sure you take your notebook with all your notes with you. You don't want to be at the port where your ancestors left and you can't remember what year they went or what port they went out of or what ship they went out of. You just make sure you bring that with you, and the flash drive makes it easy. And if you come here, make sure you bring your library card, because that's all you need. A lot of places, a lot of people start their search with the idea that they're going to create the family tree, which is a terrific goal. And I still haven't created a family tree, but I should. But what I found it very daunting to create the family tree. There were just too many holes in it when I got started. And so I'm just adding a little personal recommendation to you as you're going along. I found it very helpful to just start a timeline. And then as I went along, as I found facts, I just threw them on the timeline, and it was kind of jumbled, but it was in a structured order from an annual standpoint, from a chronological standpoint. And then as I continued along, I started a current events timeline, and then I kind of overlaid them, and to me, it was a very good way to organize my information and dates and people's comings and goings in a timeline rather than a family tree. So that's one of my recommendations for you. Now you know what to bring, what to look for, and where to look. Still, it's sometimes hard to start. We all have obstacles. We all have time constraints. We all have life's commitments that ebb and flow, and we have detours that send us in different directions. Just when we're ready to get started, something comes up and we can't get going on it, or we have to put the project down. Don't get discouraged. I wanted to just mention, in my case, I can't remember if I said it took me 6 years, but it took me 6 years from the start of when I decided to do this to when I actually published my little book. And in that 6 years, I returned to work part-time. I raised my 3 boys, who went from ages 4, 7, and 9 to ages 10, 13, and 15 in that time frame. That was a lot of sporting events that were going on. And I also buried both my parents, and my mother was my primary witness, resource, and my editor. And that was hard. And so I just wanted to say that if you find you can't do this all the time, just put it aside and come back to it later. It's okay. I did not work on this every day, and I did not work on this every month sometimes. Sometimes I put it down for months at a time. But somehow, if you can find, if it's something that you really want to do, you can find the time. And I find myself doing it an hour before the kids got up in the morning, or an hour after the kids went to bed at night, that kind of thing. And eventually, little by little, you chip away at it, and you create it, and you see a structure forming, and before you know it, you have something that you know is worthwhile. And the value of it is terrific. It doesn't, it's just keep going. Just don't get discouraged. And I hope what I've talked about today helps mitigate the idea that lack of material is going to stop you from starting, because all you need is a date and a person's name, and that's all you have to start with, and the rest will come. The other thing that I think is an obstacle for many people is that it just seems like such a big task. How can I possibly find all these people, figure out who lived where when, who was related to who, keep track of it all, put it all together for everybody? Is it ever going to be what I want it to be? And there's a great book by Anne Lamott called Bird by Bird, and it's a guide to writing. So it doesn't have anything to do with ancestry or genealogy. But the title of it is worth talking about, because Bird by Bird came about from her brother, who was tasked at school with having to write a report or an essay about all the birds in North America. And he was just paralyzed by the idea that how can I write this book about all the birds in North America? There's thousands of them, and I don't know where to start. I would never know what to do. How do you organize it? And the dad just sat him down and very calmly said, just take it bird by bird. So that's what you do. You take this person by person. You take it year by year. You take it fact by fact. And little by little, something emerges that becomes more than just an individual. It becomes the family story that you're looking for. So now you've done all your research, and you want to write your story. So, with a few pointers on the writing side of things. If you want to write about it, just find your own voice. Find what's comfortable for you. You can just put your story out there as the reporter that's kind of saying, this is what happened to this family chronologically. This person came here, and this person was born. This person died. And just report it. I'm telling you, whatever format you put it in, your family will appreciate it, that they have it in whatever format it is in. To have it written down is so valuable. You can write it as a narrator. You can be part of the story. You can interject your interpretation of what was going on in the lives of your ancestors as you go. If you want to write it sort of as a biography, or if you're actually doing your own memoirs, then please read other memoirs, read other biographies. Is a great idea to find your style. Read these people's books and just think, is that a style of writing that I'm comfortable with? Could I visualize myself writing something in that genre, in that direction, and go with it? There's also the possibility of hiring somebody to write your story for you as a ghostwriter, or there's also personal historians who will do more of a package for you and take whatever facts you start with, do more research for you, and write the whole thing up for you and produce a nice story for you. Then if you want to share it with everyone, this is where the variety of what you choose to do is so wide that whatever you want to do, I'm sure your family will love, because it's just how the information's packaged isn't that important. But I've seen some really nice family stories just printed off of a computer and stapled and handed out, and that's perfectly fine. I think if you put this much effort into it, you want to kind of produce something that's going to last for a little while. Maybe take it over to a printing place and have them put a spiral binder on it so that you can make sure it doesn't get lost in the drawer somewhere. I took the route of self-publishing, which I highly recommend that everybody explore, because there's so many options out there and there's so many inexpensive options. I ended up using a company called CreateSpace as my publishing company, and they are free. And they, one of the reasons why I chose them was, for starters, part of their free service was I would immediately get distribution on Amazon.com with my book. I would also get I would get free Kindle version, also accessible from Amazon.com. And what was the last one, Rose?
This is only the third time. I can't remember.
Oh, an ISBN. Free ISBN, so that my book is in the Library of Congress listing. But my understanding of how these publishers make money is, as I'm going along as a new wannabe author and I'm doing everything for free, there's little buttons to press, hints on how to do things a little bit better. Do you want some help with your editing? Do you need some help with your design? Do you need help with your cover? And all of those send you to options that are for added fee. And so it still keeps the price pretty low, but I did manage to get through the whole process without pressing any of those buttons. So I did the whole thing for free until it came to, there was a lot of frustration. No, it really wasn't that bad, but, and I just had a Word document. It wasn't anything special. It's just a Word document that I was able to then put into their template. And if I wanted anything more than that, I had to pay $25. So that is the extent of my fee for publishing. I paid the $25 so that I could possibly sell my book to libraries and other bookstores. And so that the whole thing was done for free. I don't pay for any inventory. The book is printed on demand, so I don't even have any upfront inventory costs. I set the price on my book, and I set my price very low because I really couldn't see my family paying more than $8 for their family story. It's great to see your book in print, for sure. And so I encourage you to look into that. There's also publishers that are self-publishing publishing houses that are really helpful and offer good packages if you don't want to mess with all the editing yourself and create and design and things like that. So explore all the options. And if you think your story has a broad enough appeal for a commercial publisher, then by all means, go and try to market your manuscript to them. It used to be a very paper-oriented process. Now it's all online. Mostly, you just send your manuscript to the publisher on the internet, and they'll get back to you in their good sweet time. But it's a lot easier than it used to be because they're all online as well. So this is a wrap-up slide, and in general, what I hope I've helped you guys get an appreciation for is the resources that are available here at the library and in the environment over in Waltham. Those are just two terrific places to start. And honestly, if you're worried about the cost of your research, I would highly recommend exhausting all your possible researching here at the library and over at the Waltham Research Room before starting a subscription to Ancestry.com, because you can do a good chunk of your research without paying anything at all. Visit the Genealogy and Historical Society websites all over the world and country and read memoirs and biographies and explore the range of self-publishing options. My biggest recommendation is don't wait. And my last story on that is about 2 months after I really decided this is what I was going to do. I'm going to write this story about my grandmother. I realized I have a relative in Florida who, the last remaining sibling of my grandmother. He was in his late 80s and sharp as a tack and in good health, living down in Florida in Winter Haven. And I wrote him a letter and I said, "This is what I'm doing, Uncle Max. Would you mind if I came down for a weekend and bring my tape recorder and we'll hang out for however long you want and talk about your life?" And I sent my letter off, and you know how you mentally think, okay, he's about got it by now. I'm going to give him a little time to think about it. And I literally was going to call him the next day, and my mom called me in the morning and said, "Uncle Max had died." So all these resources that are available to us that are growing every day on the digital side, in the research rooms and on the web and things like that, those are fantastic, and and take advantage of them right away. But the people who are living today who can tell the story will not be here forever. So be sure you don't wait.